If there's one lesson to be taken away from Gerald's game, it's don't ever, and I mean never, let anyone outside of a law-abiding official slap them bracelets on you. Words had a way of creating their own imperatives. If anyone ever asks you what panic is, now you can tell them. It's an emotional blank spot that leaves you feeling as if you've been sucking on a mouthful of pennies. But sometimes it takes heart to write about a thing, doesn't it? To let that thing out of the room way back in your mind and put it out there up on the screen. When all the normal patterns and routines of a person's life fall apart, and with such shocking suddenness, you had to find something you could hold on to. Something that was both sane and predictable. Some memories battened onto a person's mind like evil leeches, and certain words could bring them instantly back to squirming, feverish life. And the bitch of it was, once you got started, it was very hard to stop again. And some nightmares never completely ended. She wants to change the past, but the past is heavy. Trying to do that is like trying to pick up a house by one corner so you can look under it for things that have been lost and forgotten or hidden. People are the most safe from ghosts and ghouls and the living dead in daylight, and they're usually safe from them at night if they're with others. But when a person is alone, in the dark, all bets are off. She was discovering it was impossible to take the mind's advice no matter how good it was. And sometimes, being an adult felt more like a punishment than a reward. Hey, what's up, bookworms and constant readers? Mike back to take you into the multiverse as we talk about some more Stephen King, this time the 1992 psychological thriller, Gerald's Game. I think this is a book that has a reputation all its own outside of, if you've read it before, Mike Flanagan adapted that wonderful movie of it. Any of those things that you've heard about Stephen King, I feel like everyone knows. Oh, Gerald's Game, that's the one with the handcuffs, right? Yes. Everyone seems to know that little tidbit about it. It's like knowing about that scene from It. So we're going to talk today, guys, about this as we go back into the multiverse first time in a little bit. At least it feels like it a little bit. And I think we talked about Needful Things last time. But this is the 20th published novel under his own name. I'll be doing Richard Bachman stuff later. I think that this book is significant because it's what I believe began the second arc of his career, if you will. And what I mean by second arc is he did this thing, and I can't find the resource, guys, so if I'm misquoting this, I do apologize. I remember reading a Rolling Stone article a couple years after this was released, and it was talking about his change in his writing style, starting with this book. And he said this was a stretch where he wanted to write as a woman. Now, I've looked for this quote over and over again. I can't find it. So I don't know if I've made this up in my head or not. And I think that what that was is he just wanted to get inside the head of some female protagonists at the time. You know, so we got Gerald's Game, we got Dolores Claiborne, Rose Madder, Desperation, all here in a short span of time, where he wanted to kind of analyze things from a woman's point of view. So it was a very brave tactic for him to try here when he was still at the top of his game. But you could see with the last Castle Rock story in Needful Things that he was ready to try something new here. And I always admire, hey, artists are going to take a chance here. Once they've got a foothold, let's see if they can do anything a little different. Now, my first reading of this was in 1993, that Great Awakening that I always tell you guys about. But this was the first one that it was rather new. This book came out in 1992, so when I was reading it, it was brand new on paperback. So when I was reading it for the first time, it was like, okay, I'm catching up to real time here. So the first release that I wasn't able to read in that Great Awakening, as I call it, was Insomnia, and we're creeping up close to that, guys. And you won't have to hear this story every single time I do one of these. But if you want that story, guys, I have talked about it on the channel at length, and you can find it where I go through all of his stuff and how I became a constant reader. But we're here today, guys, to talk about Gerald's Game. So let's go ahead and get into what is this book about. Now, Jessie Burlingame has been talked into submitting to her husband Gerald's kinky sex games, something that she's frankly had enough of, and they never held much charm for her to begin with. So much for this romantic getaway at their secluded summer home. Because after Jesse is handcuffed to the bedpost and Gerald crosses a line with his wife, the day ends with deadly consequences. Now Jesse is utterly trapped in an isolated lakeside house that has become her prison and comes face to face with her deepest, darkest fears and memories. Her only company is that of the various voices filling her mind, as well as the shadows of nightfall that may conceal an imagined or very real threat right there in the room with her. Guys, 1992, 20th published novel. This is Gerald's Game. Now we're going to dive in, as usual, guys, with what makes this book good or bad for me. The good, starting with, look, I think he changes his writing style a little bit, but here's the thing. It doesn't lose the creeps, the chills, the frights that you've come to expect with Stephen King. All the time, when people talk about some of the scariest books, and I list Gerald's Game, people are always like, what are you talking about? Read it. That's what I'll say to you. There is stuff in here, maybe it's personal, I don't know, really, really hit home for me in that it plays on your fear of the dark, I guess you will. We all have this innate fear of the dark as human beings. It's just quite normal when you can't see what's in a room with you, or if there is something in a room with you, it can get to you a little bit. So when I tell people I think this is really, really scary and they don't understand, I tell them if you read it, you'll probably understand, because I think that we've all had that moment where you're lying awake in a pitch black room and you just swear to God someone else is in that room with you, and it just gives you the creepy crawlies. And this book hits that like no other, I think, that he's written. And again, like I said, fear of the dark is something I think is not really explored a ton. You know, I feel like, you always go back to like Lovecraft, where he's like fear of the unknown, but fear of the dark, I think, is something that is just a whole different level when you can't see what might be in the room with you, especially in extraneous situation like Jesse finds herself in here. But this has one of the freakiest villains, guys, in all of the multiverse. And I think the reason is because it's just so real. When he does his like supernatural stuff, that's obviously very creepy. But this, how it's just so real, and then you start wondering, well, is this really happening or not? That's the big crazy things there. Is this really happening? That's where you start to be like, okay, how thin is that thread between insanity and being okay? It's really, really a lot more thin than people might think it is. It just depends on how dire the situation is. And Jessie finds herself in quite the predicament in this. And I think that this has probably one of his most violent and squeamish-inducing scenes that he's ever written. And the dude's written some stuff, right? He's shown you some shit. Well, he really, really does not hold back on this one. And it is tough to read in some places, and it's done really well in the movie, by the way. For the record, this is my wife's scariest Stephen King movie because of a specific scene that happens in this movie and a specific villain. So if you've read it, if you've seen the movie, maybe but that says a lot. And I think that's something that Mike Flanagan captured very well when he adapted this, was that this book, it's very much a psychological thriller, but it has some genuine horror in it. And again, you got the best villain of all time, which is the dark, and not knowing what is in there with you. Now, this is something I think I kind of appreciate more on this reread, is that when I read this at 15, I was more like, should I be reading this? But look, guys, it was more about the kinky stuff, the sexual stuff. That was 15. What had you done yet, right? Really? I was a late bloomer because I was reading Stephen King books in the library. Anyway, that's probably a little too much information, but hey, that's why you guys are here, right? I think I didn't really know a lot about repressed memory at this point, and he really, really drives home repressed memory in this. Something that has been so traumatic in your life that you've buried it so deep in your subconscious you don't even remember it anymore. That idea hadn't really been presented to me a lot yet at 15 years old. I read, at this point, I'd read all of his books up to this point, so I felt like, okay, I know he writes like grief and trauma and things like that, but never to the point where something is just so life-changing, so life-altering that you just push it down somewhere deep and you don't even remember it. I think he might have done some of that in it, but I think also that might have been some of when they leave Derry, things change. But this isn't an It review, guys. This is a Gerald's Game review. But it does this thing where it kind of influences you to kind of do some of your own inner reflection, I think, like Jessie is doing while she's all tied up with no place to go here. She's got nothing but time and her thoughts to keep her company here. And some of the things she thinks about really is one of those things like, well, you spent all these years not thinking about it. How are you going to think about anything else now? So again, right there on the edge of madness, I think. But guys, look, this is a quick read because you are in one location. most of the book. You're with one character. You're in her thoughts and her memories. So I feel like this is a quick read. This doesn't have the usual large cast that Stephen King puts in his books, so you don't have a ton of characters to memorize or locations to memorize very easily. You're going to get, okay, this is Jessie, this is her husband Gerald, this is a dog, okay, yeah, there's a couple of people in her family that he talks about in her memories here. That's really all you need to go with. So that makes this a very quick read. I think this is pretty short for most Stephen King stuff, and I mean, you can read this in a couple of sittings. So I think that yeah, it's really quick, so you're not going to be bogged down with anything. But guys, this is an incredible character study. I've said so many times on these Into the Multiverse videos, what he does the best isn't horror. He does character the best. And I think usually coming of age, which there is some of that in here, and it's, of course, it's the bad side of coming of age. But again, he really gets inside this character's head, lets you know how they work, what makes them tick, what got them to this point of covering up this trauma. And guys, it's horrifying. It really, really is. Again, the human horrors. What I always say, it's not the big scary monster in the room. It's the harm that humans do to each other. That's what makes everything so scary. And that is very much played into the coming of age sequence in this book. But yeah, just it's more than just a woman handcuffed to a bed. I get that a lot. It's a woman handcuffed to a bed. How entertaining can that be? Guys, this isn't that movie Phone Booth, okay? I mean, this has, you can hear the inner monologue. So you know what's going on in this character's head. And being transfixed through time with this character and going back to her, her past, her dark past, and visiting these things, combined with the crazy stuff that's going on in her present, it's just a perfect mix. And it just shows what happens when you get in a dire situation and you just have nothing but time to think about those dark, dark memories. So Jesse is a very complex and layered character, guys, and I think that he does a great job really, really diving deep into what makes her tick even before the situation she finds herself in. Now, there isn't everything's never perfect in a Stephen King book. I don't pretend that. Now, again, these are going to be subjective to you. I didn't necessarily find problems with these, but these might be some things. There's some feedback I've heard from some people that didn't like this so much. Look, King's forte, especially after Needful Things. He just did Needful Things. And what was one of the things he did great in there? He built this huge, living, breathing town, right? This amazing cast of characters. Very small cast in this. This isn't his usual rich cast of characters. I think it balances out because he spends so much time developing this one character, and it's done just beautifully. But for some people, they want a little bit of differentiated in the cast, differentiated characters in their cast, and I think you might be missing that here. Being stuck with just one character and her memories, it may not move fast enough for you. Again, I think it's a page turner because I keep wanting to know what got her this messed up. So that was the mystery for me. That was the hook that kept me going. But again, that might be something you're not into because it is just a character alone with her thoughts. So there isn't a lot of dialogue back and forth, between two characters. And look, the violence and obviously the sexual conduct might be uncomfortable for you to read. Now, guys, I always say you're reading Stephen King. You should expect to be a little uncomfortable. I mean, that's what the man's been doing for 40 years, He's been scaring the hell out of us and making us uncomfortable. So I don't know why people go into a Stephen King book expecting to be at ease. This is going to be a feel-good story. I mean, he always has those moments, but they're moments. They're not the story, I usually think. So, yeah, you're going to be uncomfortable. Again, I think that's the crux of the story here. So, again, it's things that might hit a little too close for home for some people. If they've had some traumatic childhood experiences, it might really be damaging for them. To like I said, this book will make you do some inner reflection. So I can't speak too much about repressed memory. I'm not a doctor. I would refer you to my friend Sarah if you want to talk about stuff like that. Sarah Reed's great Stephen King fan, great channel, great person. But yeah, I'm not the person to diagnose that for you. But again, I do think this book will start making you think about some things, and I think the way that it's done this book can be tough for some people. So I understand the criticism there. I don't understand the criticism of the way he writes female characters, especially in this one. But we'll talk about that when I get into guys now. Why I think that you should read it. Look, you can read this in a couple of sittings. Like I said, small cast, quick flow. I don't think there's ever a point where I'm just like, oh, can we get on with it? I always wanted to know, like I said, what happened with this character and her family. So it really does keep the pages flowing that way. Not a large cast, even her memories. It's really secluded to her and just a handful of other characters. Some have one line, two lines, and they're gone. But I think that the criticism of King not being able to write good female characters, I don't know where the hell that came from. I think he's had numerous great female characters up to this point. Beverly Marsh, we got Carrie White. So many. You can go back and watch reviews, guys. I talk about this. So I've never really understood. I've heard people say that he just hypersexualizes his female characters. I mean, I can see where you're coming from, but I think it's really unfair. With this, I think that this just shows the guy can write women. Like, guys aren't supposed to be able to write women. Now, look, full disclosure, it's a secret here. I'm a guy, okay? So I can only look at this from a guy's perspective. But the feedback that I've gotten from other King fans, especially the lady King fans, is that, yeah, he did a great job of getting inside of women's head. And what I like about it is he doesn't pander in the way to put yourself in a woman's head and her struggles. He doesn't do it in a pandering way. He does it in a relatable way. And I feel like that's the way that a lot of modern authors have kind of lost their way on that. I think that he does it in such a way that you really do sympathize, empathize, and relate to this character, regardless of if you're a man or a woman reading this. So that's just a talent. The guy is brilliant at things like that, and he continues to show it here. And I think with this one, again, it just takes that narrative and it just completely smashes it to shit because it's not true, and this one will prove it. If I got some final thoughts here, guys, look, reading this, like I said, at 15, I wasn't sure if it was something I should be reading. I loved it on the reread because I thought about some other things. Now, look, not gonna lie to you, I don't have any crazy repressed memories, and if I do, I just haven't thought of them yet. I had a pretty boring childhood in that regard, thankfully, so I don't have a lot of those things to go back to. I mean, I was like bullied and stuff. Who wasn't bullied, especially as a bookworm, right? But other than that, nothing like what's presented in this book, I don't think. So, again, reading it now, I think I really did enjoy those parts of it, as much as you can enjoy content matter like that. But it really just had me just completely enamored with just this idea of being able to hide memories. Something he kind of expands a little bit more later in Lisi's story with like repressed memories and things like that. So I think this was kind of scratching the surface for some bigger things that he would do later. But look, I think it took a lot of courage to change up. You're right. I mean, you're one of the biggest writers in the world at this time, and to completely change your direction. But I don't feel like he lost his identity with this. He did change some things. He changed the way he was going to write characters, the way he was going to write women. But he didn't lose what makes King King, and that is his character work. That is his chills and his frights, and they're all here in this story. It was amazing what he's able to do to narrow this down to just a singular character and her thoughts and make it compelling for 300 plus pages. Guy's a wizard. Look, I like it with this one is he really started to embrace the multiverse a little more. And that's a perfect chance, guys, to move into the Multiverse Connections for Gerald's game. Quick spoiler warning, guys. This will have connections to other stories in the multiverse. I don't think it's anything that's going to ruin a book for you. But again, if you want to be completely free of all of this stuff when you read his books, you might want to bookmark this, come back after you've read the entire multiverse, which might take you a little bit, but I appreciate you coming back. Now, Multiverse Connections, first up, the biggest one, guys, is Dolores Claiborne. A lot of people don't know is that Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne was originally presented to his publisher to be one book with two parts, a part one and a part two. Forget what it was actually titled, like something about the Garden of Eden or something. I can't remember exactly what it was. East of Eden's another book, isn't it? Anyhow, but there is reasons that was why those two books have such big connections in them. And I'll talk about them more in detail when I do Dolores Claiborne next month. But with this, the eclipse takes place at the same time in both these books, are taking place concurrently. And Jesse in this and Dolores in that book, they do see each other in each other's books. I won't tell you how, because I feel like that could be spoiling Dolores' story for you. But I think that it's very, very cool. And that's something I love that Mike Flanagan kept in that adaptation of Gerald's Game. That makes me wonder if he's ever going to do Dolores Claiborne. It would be really awesome. It'd be hard to beat that other Dolores Claiborne, because, I mean, Kathy Bates, right? But again, you can't help but talk about Dolores Claiborne when you talk about this book, because they feel like sister novels. And I think that's the way that he has described these books, as sister novels. So check out everything in Dolores Claiborne immediately after this, and it's going to make so much sense to you the way that the eclipse connects these two characters. There's also some stuff from It, real briefly, and there's other mentions of Juniper Hills in his stories, but Raymond Joubert in there did talk about how he spent some time in Juniper Hills. Most people, I think they always want to talk about Shawshank, but Shawshank's for the convicts, and Juniper Hills is for the loonies. So there you go. Needful things. Pangborn is mentioned, as well as his deputy, Norris Ridgewick. He is the one who apprehends Joubert in here. So again, right after Needful things, those characters are fresh in his mind. Pangborn gets more mentions than I think he gets appearances in the multiverse, but they're always memorable. When you see a memorable name, you're like, hey, cool, those characters, even though they're not on the page anymore, they're still out there. They're still in this universe that makes his universe continue to feel well-rounded out. And then Insomnia, Joubert is mentioned in casual conversation between some characters. So I think something like they're saying, you know how you would say, like, hey, I'm no Jeffrey Dahmer. He kind of says it like that. Hey, I'm no Raymond Joubert, or something like that. Just, again, nice little name drops. Again, a lot of these are more Easter eggs, I think, than massive connections, except Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's Game. Those are obviously always going to be linked. But guys, that was Gerald's Game, a book that I really think I liked way more on my reread than I did on my initial read, just because, like I said, I was very, very young, and I hadn't done a lot in life yet. Not that I've gone crazy like what's in this book, but you know what I mean. You just have different life experiences, and that's why I like reading these as a teenager. Reading them as an adult, you get different things from them each time, and again, that is what makes Cy King a dark, dark wizard. So guys, Gerald's Game, have you read it? What did you think? Drop in the comments and let me know, but leave your handcuffs at home.